Against Abuse. This is Busybody Podcast, and today I'm speaking with Rachel Spurrier, who is my co-host of Virtual Run Club and our Marathon Run Club, both of which are virtual. Virtual Run Club, Virtual Marathon Run Club. Virtual Run Club is our inclusive, extremely beginner-friendly virtual run club where you get 3 run workouts a week. You get a private group chat. You get a private Strava to keep track of your runs. And we have 3 Zoom calls with everyone in the club and Rachel and myself. You also get included fascia release sessions so that you can prevent injury and stay mobile. So we do everything we can to give you a really balanced running experience so that you can go from literally nothing. We have people who don't even own running shoes who join the club, people who've never run before, people who say that they hate running. That's a big one on the first call. But everyone has this kind of yearning to make what is really a very accessible, free, outdoor mental health boosting activity part of their lives. So I hope you'll check out our running clubs. You don't have to run a marathon to join our marathon club. It's anything over 5K, which is 3 miles. And that starts in the spring. It's only once a year. Run club, virtual run club happens several times a year. Check the website, check the show notes. And I hope you really enjoy this conversation with Rachel, our brave leader. She's a wonderful coach and makes us all stronger and better. Well, thanks so much for coming on again. I had to have you on more regularly, but kind of took a summer break. But I got so much good feedback from our last episode talking about running.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
So can you introduce yourself and your skills? Because you're quite accomplished. And if you don't brag about yourself, I will brag about you for you.
Sure. So my name is Rachel, and let's see, I am a running coach, and I've been doing this for almost 10 years. It's around that, maybe a little bit less than that. But I started coaching actually right shortly after I had my first child. And it really was just something that kind of like came out organically from there, where I was just seeking more information about sort of returning to running and everything like that. So it was sort of like self-educating. And then I just, started to coach here and there, and then gradually it sort of like built from there. I'm also a runner myself, and have done pretty much like all the races, all the distances. Anything from like a mile to an ultra marathon. So can't believe I said that because I never thought I would ever do that kind of distance, but that's sort of like part of the journey, I guess.
That's what I've been learning with you for sure. And also you just ran your 20th marathon.
I did. Yes.
Amazing. And you kind of started running a little bit, I don't know what a typical time is for people to run, but didn't you start running in college more?
I really didn't. It's interesting because I don't really have like a clear, or specific like point where it was like the line of being like, oh yes, I was a runner, or I was starting to describe myself as like, that was just, something I did, or just, sort of like added to like, oh, I am this, and this, and I'm a runner. I didn't actually run my first race until I was in my late 20s. But I had been running, I guess on a regular basis, 2-3 times a week, starting probably my senior year of college. But really it was more regular when I graduated and had my first job and kind of was stressed out and looking for balance. I did do a little bit of running in high school, but it was really tied to, I played field hockey. So it was sort of like seasonal and tied to that. And it was sort of like cramming, like, oh my God, I have to make the team. Like I have to start running like a week before tryouts. But that being said, I was not like a college athlete or anything like that. I was pretty like sitting on my butt, most of the time. So yeah.
I bring that up just because I think, and so much of what I want to talk about today is people's perceptions about what a runner is, how you become a runner, what it means to be a runner. And I think I think like in my own mind, I also just thought like, oh, people that are big runners or something, they have a long history of running related athletics, track and field in high school, or soccer or something where you're basketball doing a lot of running back and forth, and that basically one must have a foundation like that in order to get started or find a consistent practice. Can you talk a little bit about how you went from being like running is something that you do adjacently to other things to finding yourself running consistently?
Yeah, so I guess it's sort of like parallel to different, circumstances and sort of where I was, you know, in different phases of my life, So, I'll be honest, when I first started running, my senior year of college, it actually was kind of coming from a place of like, I really wasn't very happy. I had gained some weight and I was like desperately trying to like figure out how to and I guess sort of at that time I was sort of thinking like that was a negative thing and I was trying to lose that. So it was just coming from like a kind of a not a very happy place in all sorts of ways. So it was interesting because I was probably doing more walking than actual running. I did do a little bit of running on the treadmill and sort of like the dormitory gym to running outside. And running outside or just being active outside, let's just call it that, especially at that place, did really help my sort of mental emotional state. It really kind of it was almost like, sort of therapy. I mean, I don't mean to use that like, lightly either. So that was sort of in that phase. Certainly when I was on the treadmill, it was much more like it almost felt like self-punishment too. But fast forward, I got my first job and it was long hours and I was stressed out often. So I was more seeking more of a balance and just trying to kind of seek out just what I thought at the time was, just trying to be healthy. And again, sort of, I'm going back 2 decades really. So I, again, sort of now I'm sort of like looking back on how I thought how I thought that the approach was. But as I became more regular about trying to integrate some sort of exercise, I think having the regularity was helpful. It was sometimes something I could actually look forward to. And so that sort of became more of like, what I would call like a good practice. But then I never, I had some other friends and colleagues that were doing races, and I just sort of, it never even occurred to me to kind of consider that, or I didn't even think of myself really as an athlete, or sort of that type of person to even do that. I just thought it was sort of reserved for like, oh, you had to be fast or you had to be a certain way or so I never even considered it. And it really wasn't until my late 20s where I was in DC for the first 2 years after graduation, and then I moved to New York. So at the time I was living on the upper west side, and Central Park was literally 2 blocks away. So I would do more running in Central Park, and sometimes you would just like, run into actual races that were happening. And I think somehow I just sort of had it in my mind that like, oh, I'm seeing all these people and they look like me, or, they are old, they're young, they're, large bodied individuals. It's just like, it felt like, I think I could maybe consider doing a race. So then, I signed up for a race, I did the race, and then sort of got in that cycle of races. And somehow along the way, I just, started to describe myself as a runner. So, yeah.
With that kind of gradual finding your path there, I think something that we talk about a lot in Run Club, and I feel like we kind of have two different kinds of participants. We have people that really have never run before, who, are very intimidated, really looking for a gentle way in. And we also have people that had a running practice at some time similar to what you're describing, that kind of was coming from a really negative place and are looking for a way back in, because they're recognizing, there were a few little positives, like you mentioned, like the mental health benefits of being outside, the consistency being something to look forward to, the feeling of fitness and just like vitality. But how do I do this without doing it in this kind of like all or nothing, beat myself up, run so hard as fast as I can until I can't? I think that a lot of what we try to frame for people is kind of exactly what you saw in that race, that running is actually very accessible and inclusive. It doesn't get marketed that way. It doesn't get like the and whistles, the accessories, the clothes, the shoes, all this stuff. And certainly it has a history, which I don't even know very much about. I was just watching, I was reading something about all these women ultra distance marathoners who are beating men, and all the men are very upset about this, and so they're trying to find reasons to explain this crazy phenomenon of women being stronger than men. And this, I guess, like the editor of like Outdoor Magazine or something was saying that historically running was kind of skinny white men with beards, and that was like the 70s history of white men of running. And that's well before our time. But like I didn't know, like I have no connection to this kind of weird side of running that was like, it was very esoteric, and it was like these guys running in like tiny shorts and like, if it was like a hippie thing or what. But I think it's so funny that there's that start to it, and somehow now it's like this super, I mean, it's not funny, it's just capitalism. You have to have the best clothes, the best shoes. It's so shiny, it's so expensive, the bar is so high now, you have to run so fast. There's not a question in that. This is
Yeah. Running, it's changed dramatically. And I know, the 60s and 70s, 80s, like may feel like, a long time ago for some folks, but, child of the early 80s, you and me both, it's really actually, when we really stop and think about it, it actually, isn't that, far away, really. But it has changed. It's changed a lot. I think we still have a long ways to go. I will say that, yes, for sure, there's much more, and you kind of are seeing like a wave of, more inclusive for female athletes or those who identify as female. We're seeing, more and more race organizers have like the non-binary category. So that's great. In terms of, body type, and also the sort of fast versus slow, and sort of embracing, all levels, all paces. There's still a lot, there's improvements to be made there. But I will say that even in the past couple years, there are more opportunities. But that doesn't mean that they're are a lot of folks, and we see them too in our virtual run club that, have had, and you've experienced this too, but like we've had these sort of negative experiences, or feelings of alienation, or made to feel, less than, or like we're not part of this, this bigger community. And certainly that goes hand in hand with like the overarching sort of wellness fitness world. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting just to kind of look at it from an observation standpoint. But like you said, even from a marketing standpoint, like there are, tremendous like opportunities, from all these brands that are sort of seeing this like tidal wave of, marathon participation is up like the highest it's ever been. And just looking at the numbers, like that's a great opportunity if you're in like the marketing and, retail sales like world. But yeah, it's just interesting to kind of just look at it that
I
way.
think too, first of all, I think people don't realize like women weren't allowed in to compete in races until the mid 70s, which is like very
Correct. Yeah.
recently.
Yeah.
And I will go on and on about how the first women's running shoe was like, unfortunately, I'm not someone who remembers small details like dates, but like it was like this decade, like the first women's running shoe. Meaning that pretty much, and this is kind of across the board for female athletes or athletic wear, there's actually a great book that I interviewed her on my podcast. Also, why do I put all the books away that I already interviewed people on? She wrote, it's called Shrink It and Pink It is the chapter title, but it's that they always create female clothing, accessories, needs, your gear as just the men's version built for a male body, but just smaller and pink. Which doesn't take into account female bodies at all. And so literally the shoes are built for a male foot, which you would think isn't that different, but it's about like weight distribution, average height, average weight
For
at
sure.
that height. So it does make a difference. And that means that even top female athletes until recently were running in a small men's shoe or even a child's shoe, which just blows my mind
Yeah.
in order
Yeah.
for it to fit them.
Yeah, it's built on the male last. It's like so the shoes. And it's interesting too because this is, we can talk about shoes as an example of this, but it crosses into sort of these different training philosophies, because that is, sort of these pillars, these most of them are athletes, or were athletes, but mainly men, or really all men, who have developed different training programs, that you'll see. You go to like, and we still see it, but you go to like any bookstore and you look at, or certainly online, you look at sort of any training program, and it's developed by men, and it's really for, originally it was really for men. And that's where, I think we have to kind of certainly question, or, why, and should we do it this way? And is it really appropriate for like my body or my circumstance? But I think we also have to be open to, alternatives. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And we've even talked about just the nitty gritty of people adjusting their heart rate monitors and their Apple Watches, realizing that all those metrics are being set to male bodies and the difference there. And yeah, that the female heart rate is going to have a different set rate and all these things. So it really goes on and on. And I think that is where running is still extremely non-inclusive, because when we go to just the random run group in your neighborhood, most likely it's coached by a man still. Unfortunately, I still find that that's the case. And if there is a woman, she's like the co-coach and she's much quieter. The goal is always still kind of speed and distance, which depending on what someone's goals are, if they're brand new or they're coming back from an injury, it's just really hard not to feel ashamed when you're like, okay, but I'm going to be running at this pace, or I'm not going to be running that longer distance, because usually these neighborhood run groups have like a set distance that they do, and they kind of pre-publish the pace that they run at. And even that, a lot of run groups that call themselves open level, they will write out what paces they are as though everyone knows what that means, which if you really
Yeah.
have never run, you don't even know what that means. And I joined a really big run group in San Francisco to do one of my training runs when I was traveling. And they were super friendly. So I don't remember the name of that group, but it was humongous. Shout out to how friendly and organized they were. And they did have pacers, but it was really interesting that, like, basically still who comes to running, the fastest pace was the biggest group, and it just gradually got smaller and smaller and smaller until the slowest pace was basically older people who were planning to walk. And I was like, that's the pace that I often do my runs at. Like, I was just like, I won't even have anyone to run with because those people aren't choosing to run. And of course I joined a group that was like slightly faster than mine, just to like be in a group, and then was like huffing and puffing with them. But I think that a place that we really serve is actually being inclusive. I think that's also the benefit of it being virtual, is you're running on your own with this group, as opposed to having to group everyone together by pace. Although hilariously, really everyone in our groups tend to run at a similar pace. They could all run together.
Yeah.
Can you speak to the kind of training, because something that comes up a lot in questions from our participants is like, isn't there a right way to train, or a right gait to have, or the right shoe to have? All this kind of, I think that's part of this like weirdly high bar for running that is really in opposition to what running is and can be. Like, literally remembering that human hominid apes were really built to run. So if you are a human, you are built to run, which doesn't mean you might be the fastest or the strongest, but you can run. Can you speak a little bit to that like weird binary that is really part of running culture right now?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because, um, there's a lot, when you start to peek into certainly social media, the broader web as a whole, or even just like anecdotally, there's a lot of like quote like information out there, or people who call themselves experts or whatever, or just people that are sharing a lot of their own personal like fitness or running journeys. So it's, it really is kind of, it is very challenging to kind of like figure out like, what should I be doing? Or, what is the quote, like right way of doing things? Or is there a right and a wrong way? And is it just black and white? Or is it just, more little sort of in this gray area? And for the most part, like there's not, just to be very simplistic about it, there's not like there's not a right way and there's not a wrong way. On, your form or your training plan, et cetera. There's certain, benchmarks or guidelines that, anybody should be attuned to. The classic, phrase of don't do too much too soon, is something that, I think people need to be aware of. But then it's sort of like, okay, well, how does that apply to me? So you can have someone that is like, yeah, sure, I haven't really ever run before. But they have a much easier time to start running for multiple minutes at a time, maybe even a mile or two, and really be okay. And then repeat the same thing, a few days later, and on they go. But you also have, you can have another person sitting side by side, and it's like trying to do a minute or two is quite challenging. So how do you figure that out? And as a coach, how do you certainly how you program or how you really give advice. And I think the other piece of advice I would say is really think about your not necessarily paces, but I like to use the term gears and really think about you don't really have two gears. You have many ones. So if you think about your gears, translate it into effort and really what that means. If we use a 1 to 10 scale, you can use a 1 to 20 scale. And kind of figure out, okay, let's try to make a gradual increase and then pull back. And just becoming more aware of that, I think will help certainly in the increasing within any sort of training or running program they do. But it will help that person to again don't do too much too soon, but really become more aware of their bodies and their limitations and sort of just sensations and that will just help them to progress. So
I think that's something I really appreciate in your programming is it's not like every week or like every workout is faster or longer. Every workout has a different focus, and cumulatively that all those different workouts make you stronger, which when you're stronger you tend to get faster, but that's not necessarily a goal at all. But the strength means the stamina, so people are able to run longer. If they couldn't run a mile, they're getting closer and closer to a mile. If they couldn't run, a route in their neighborhood, a 20-minute route in their neighborhood, they're suddenly able to do that. And it's just kind of refreshing that there are different, like you said, gears built in so that one learns to drop back, to go faster, to go slower, to really learn what all that feels like, which I think is really kind of a mind blower for a lot of our participants that these are tools. I mean, even for me, as I've been essentially taking our course over this past couple of years, that realizing that like, oh, the slower pace, the faster pace, these are all like tools in our tool bag for different circumstances, because you don't run the same way in rain or wind or when it's hot or when it's freezing or uphill or downhill. Like we have this idea that running is really like the same all the time. And I think I often joke in our like first run club call that we all know that person that we see in our neighborhood that's like out running every day at the same time, no matter what. And like, that is really like the image that we all have. Like, oh, I'm not a runner because I'm not like that person that I just like always see. And then I'm always like, we don't know. Maybe that person just runs that part of the block. Like, I've never followed that person. I don't know how far they go. I don't know where they started, what they're doing. Maybe they just do a little jog down my block and then walk the rest of the way. But we really have this idea of like this real fixed aspect of running, which I think so goes in opposition to like how people's lives really are. And so then that brings in all this like immediate giving up of like, oh, I tried to run 3 miles 2 times a week and I couldn't, and so I'm terrible at running, I'll never do it again. I just think that like the nuance, I think, is something that you've really educated me on about running, that like even just saying it out loud, I'm like, oh, running itself seems really simple because it's just like this same movement, move one foot and the other foot over and over again. So either do that or don't do that. And then, but all the programming, I'm like, oh, there's all these different ways to build strength, including the mental strength and the like you said, the sensations and the tools that we build in those workouts that help people get out of literally the mental state that makes you want to quit or think that a workout is going badly when it's not. Can you speak a little bit to that kind of creating consistency, or, breaking that mold of like that a run workout should always be the same, look the same, feel the same?
yeah, so this is something that I know I've experienced. And it can really be challenging when you don't have a set routine, and I don't I've definitely fallen into, a cycle of literally doing the same distance, or the same route, like every day or, every other day or whatever. Just because, you know, I'm just like almost on autopilot for whatever situation I'm in or whatever. And that's okay. When you're trying to have more variation, whether it's within a workout, and that can be anything like run, walk, if you're just running and no walking, but you're doing, faster intervals or whatnot, maybe even some speed work. So some of those higher intensity intervals are definitely, peppered throughout, but then you're always kind of pulling back. And then another day, there's a different kind of workout. I can certainly understand and relate to, it can, for some people, it can cause a little bit of an anxiety even, when they're like, wait, what? I have to do this workout, or even change up the route. I think in the long term, though, it is really important that, we do approach our runs or our exercise, segments, though, with, more of the mindset of, okay, like I'm going to do something different this day, or I'm going to pivot, because inevitably there's going to always have there's going to be some curveballs that get thrown one's way. I mean, certainly if you have more sort of variability in your workouts, like sure, that is going to probably help you from a fitness standpoint. But from a practical standpoint, it will help you in the long term. So it can be as simple as like, oh my gosh, it is pouring rain outside and it's thunderstorming, or it's really cold and there's ice all over the pavement. Like, what do I do? So being able to think about it like, oh, I could actually do something else, or I have my period, or and I'm feeling like crap. But I feel like maybe some movement might help. So maybe giving yourself a little bit of grace and just trying something else, that maybe necessarily wasn't even in the plan. And you're just deciding to walk instead. So any chance someone has to, maybe give themselves a little more permission to change things up, and maybe even look at a plan, or a workout that maybe they had been prescribed, and really allow themselves to almost be that curator, based on kind of what their individual situation is. And that really can help someone. I think there's much more longevity there. And I really also think that helps. I mean, just going back to sort of like this, like the balance that I think so many of us are seeking, but also sort of like helping with our, the mental load as well. But I really think that will give someone, I think, in a way, just more, just understanding and also sort of embracing of themselves that way.
Yeah,
So
I think that kind of permission is the word. It's like it comes up a lot in our group chat in the run club, of just people realizing they can run for an errand and that can be their run, or they can do half their run workout and then finish it later in the day, and that's okay too. And these, obviously it would be nice to have a nice solid run moment where it's time for yourself and you're, have all that focus. But if one is in a moment in time where life is busy or whatever, the holidays, all these things that come up and really disrupt our schedules, learning, like you said, to pivot and give yourself permission to change what your idea of a run workout or what your run is supposed to look like, basically allows you to keep the consistency that keeps your fitness, that keeps building your strength. And that's something that I've seen even in my own practice with you with the run club. And then as we developed the marathon run club, which you don't have to run a marathon to join, but it's anything over 5K, which is 3 miles. So that's a low bar for doing a little bit longer distance. Just kind of doing a longer training plan and realizing, okay, not all my runs, especially as they get longer and take more time, are going to be like the most best, funnest route and like perfect circumstances, especially because as they get longer, the time commitment is bigger, and it often has to do with weather. Like, what day am I going to go out? It might not be the day that I'm the most energetic, but if every other day is like pouring rain or insanely hot, it's like, okay, well, that's the day I'm going to do it. And just like learning to embrace whatever that means. Like, maybe that means like it's going to be a lot more walking time, or, you know, whatever. It's going to be a route that's more boring, but it's closer to my house. And if it's super rainy and hot or whatever, whatever the circumstances are, it means that I'm not also driving on top of my run workouts. I don't know why just human beings we kind of love to like lock ourselves down. We create stories so quickly about ourselves and what we need to do something, and then we just like hold to that so strongly. We've had so many real beginner runners be very flummoxed by weather. Like, that's a big one that comes up, is depending what season we're in. People just really like, what do you do when it's raining? What do you do if it's muddy? And it's like humorous because all these people are very high functioning adults, and it's like, you do the same thing that you do when you have to leave your house in that weather anyway. But I get that they're like, but I'm already in an experience that's challenging. I'm running on the sidewalk. I'm already pushing myself and like pushing a boundary. What do I do if it's also raining into my face the whole time? Like, how do I handle that? And again, we often are just giving permission of like, you wear a hat, you try and run under trees, you like, you know, you really realize that you're going to get wet. You always do a long post about how it's actually often really fun to run in weather, which I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I've said this before to some of the group members, but this idea of the perfect run,
Yeah.
where every workout, just everything has to align, either leading up to it, the weather has to be ideal, like it's a great time of day, based on how we're feeling and our work schedules and family dynamics. And during the run, we have this preconceived idea that like, oh, we have to feel a certain way, and then we finish and then we just did it and like everything's great. It sometimes that does happen. And that's great. But majority of the time things are just messy. It may not be good weather. We may just feel super tired. We may force ourselves to get up like even earlier. Our clothes are smelly because we didn't wash them. And during the run, we feel like garbage. But I will have to say, and I experienced this too. I mean, a lot of times people are like, oh, you're a running coach. You must love running like every single time. And I'm like, no. It's really hard sometimes, and like I feel like garbage, a lot of the times, especially when I start out. But I always like to, I do this myself, and I have to remind myself, especially when I'm like, I don't really feel like running today, or like it's really cold. I just want to stay inside, like under my covers. But I remind myself, and I try to remind others as well, that try to focus on, certainly, mood follows action. So if you just get out the door, doesn't matter what you plan to do or how you approach the workout, or even if you run or walk, doesn't matter. If you divert from the workout, fine. And focus on how you feel afterwards. Maybe not right after you come back in the door, but how did the rest of your day go if you ran in the morning? Were you like more mentally kind of sharp? Did you sleep better like that evening? There's so many other factors that I think come into it. And I think it's really important to almost think about like, certainly the benefits, but really just like, how are you feeling after you did that? Like, are you proud, even if you don't feel great, are you still proud of yourself for getting out the door, amidst all these obstacles, for carving some time for yourself to do this? And I would also say, we're talking about running and I am a running coach, but this really applies to so many other things. So if people try running and they're like, yeah, it's okay, but I actually prefer my other go-to exercise is this, or, insert whatever, like that's great. So I think this sort of, applies like, in other areas as well.
100%, 100%. I think that's, if people can get enough consistency to start experiencing that, that is like a huge turning point. Like just basically the practice, you're essentially practicing discipline to some extent. And I think a lot of people mistake discipline or kind of conflate discipline with kind of the more self-harm, self-punishment thing, especially people that had a long history of running as a form of self-punishment, and really like untangling that and being like, I can approach this actually in a much more like holistic, almost reparenting thing of like, you'll feel better after. Just like I hate taking showers in the winter. The bathroom is cold. I don't want to get in water. Please no. The only way that I don't become a grubby person like Lionel or whatever with like bugs flying around me is I think about how I'm going to feel afterwards. But I don't want to stand naked in a cold bathroom and turn the water on. That's like a horrible experience for me.
Same here. Same here.
Hilariously, in the winter, I also do cold swimming, and a friend of mine who does it as well said that his part talking about the swimming while they were on their way to the swimming, and it's like it's in February, it's cold, we're all bundled up, and he said that he told him. He was like, no, we don't talk about the swimming before the swimming because it's all about afterwards. People are always like, oh my God, you must love the cold also. And we're like, no, if you come, no one there loves the cold. No one there loves winter. No one wants to do it. We all do it because afterwards we feel so amazing. And that's the entire focus. And we're all just standing there, on the beach, ready to take all our winter clothes off and stand in our bathing suits, being like, this is insane, why are we doing this? But the afterwards is so, it really blows that whole feeling away. Now, running shouldn't necessarily be like that big of a lift. It's not, hopefully like at least 60% of the time you're enjoying yourself out there. But I do think, yeah, the first part of everyone's run feels like crap. You're like scraping the rust off, your body's just literally warming up into it. Especially if it's colder, it takes longer to warm up, means more of your run is kind of like a little bit crunchy feeling. And I always feel like I get such a mental boost from running, which means that the first part of my run, it's like my brain kind of starts to slowly go offline. So I'm also like lost in all my work thoughts or whatever for my first 10, 15 minutes. And then everything starts to shift, and then I get that nice flow feeling, and I'm like, oh, this is why I'm out here. Now I'm just like, la, la, la. That's like creative brain takes over. I get lots of good ideas for things. It's like nice place for myself. But I think there's sort of like, if people are holding on to some kind of idea that runners, or if they get good enough at running, every run feels amazing, they're like, just gliding along. That's not the case in anything that we do ever, and anyone who's telling you that, I think, is not really being truthful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And, it's interesting too, we're hearing this a lot more, with some of the, fellow athletes, and really everyone I consider an athlete. They might not describe themselves that way, but anyone that signs up and really dedicates themselves to this, in some cases it's a new kind of practice, that is just another kind of adventure they are taking on. But yeah, we hear this a lot, that it's just sort of a different approach that they're experiencing. Yeah.
Talk to you about injury, because I can almost imagine someone being like, right, except that whenever I run, I get injured. So that means I'm not a runner and I can never run. We get that question also quite a bit in the run club, usually before people sign up.
Yeah. So I think, our bodies, it's just as humans, like we don't like to be uncomfortable. So, it's always, when people, and also people are a lot of times quick to kind of like come to a conclusion. So if they're feeling something that they haven't really felt before, or it's an area of their body that they're feeling some sort of sensation, um, I think there's just a lot of follow-up questions that we have to, ask or probe a little bit. And sometimes, it's still sort of in this like gray area, or, things are still kind of unknown. We're not the doctors that are like diagnosing like specific things, but we can certainly we can hypothesize about like what might be going on. But I really think it's like we also, I think it's important to point out like different connections that people may not be doing themselves. But the idea of like, if something's sore, that doesn't necessarily mean they're injured. Or if it's, something that they feel like is becomes like a chronic thing, like they're sort of experiencing this like every day or every time they go on a run and they're just feeling whatever it is. Afterwards, like I think people are thinking, oh my God, they'll resort to like Dr. Google and like, I've done it before too. And we're like, oh my God, this is my diagnosis. So it's really just kind of having more of a conversation with, those specific people, and trying to kind of talk them down, off the ledge a little bit, about what they might actually be feeling and also what they could do about it. So if someone is like complaining about their, the bottoms of their feet hurt, well, what is that, even the terminology, like what kind of hurt is that exactly? Like, is it just achiness? Or is it just like stiffness? Or is it a sharp, stabbing feeling, which would probably not be a good thing. However, like you just don't know. It could just be like some nerve things that are going on. And also, something that you are like really the expert on is like, the interconnectivity of our bodies, and also, all that you do with like the fascia release and really helping all of us to kind of take care of our whole bodies and sort of see what else we can do within our practice of whatever we're doing, in this case running, and really kind of goes hand in hand.
I think too, people on that idea of like people are really unused to discomfort, and any kind of discomfort people feel like is a huge red flag and they start to back away. There's also, if you aren't used to athletics, the idea that you're injured seems like, oh, that's it, I'm done. Whereas if you have a history in athletics, you know that often, first of all, getting injured is just kind of part of living in a human body, especially an active human body, which doesn't mean being sedentary, because this is the funny part. Being sedentary doesn't save you from getting injured. It just often happens more slowly, like over time. Suddenly your shoulders are crazy, crazy tight. Or it happens quickly in that you are low conditioned. And so, you go to reach for something and you throw your back out, which is different than like you started running hills and now you're like, Achilles tendon is kind of inflamed and you're like, what do I do about it? How do I build that back up? I think so often when we're doing something new, like beginning a running program and trying to build that into our lives, personally, I know that if I'm going to like change up my fitness in some way, I expect something to kind of, what I would say is like, talk to me. I expect something to kind of knock at the door and be like, oh, you're upping your game. Your tight hip thing is going to talk to you a minute. And you got to take the time to be like, okay, how do I work with this thing that I already know as part of my structure or the way that my body generally functions and bring myself to this next level. And that means a lot of experimenting. And oftentimes when people are feeling something in their body, once we kind of discuss it with them individually, we often tell them to go out again and run gently and take walk breaks and check in. And is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Did it need to just kind of get shaken out? You know, is it totally fine actually when you're running and it bothers you after? All that's great information. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a hard no. It often means there needs to be some strength building or kind of awareness of everything else around the run, hydration, eating well. Are you on your feet all day wearing like really uncomfortable shoes and then you go for a run? Of course, that's going to have an effect, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's interesting because, as a person now, like, I'm very regular about running and, I'm very consistent. And I really have not, I've been pretty lucky and I haven't gotten seriously injured. But that doesn't mean I have, discomforts every now and then, or areas in my body that it's sort of borderline. So I really need to kind of figure out like, okay, so what can I do to like adjust or give myself, more time with recovery, or like maybe I need to scale back on the running and just do walking or whatever. I will say that, I like to kind of think about, those times where we'll wake up in the morning after sleeping and then we're like, oh my God, my neck or my shoulder, like, and that would be very easy to be like, I just injured myself sleeping. Should you not sleep? Like, no, like you need your sleep. But maybe we just moved a certain way, or like maybe we need a new pillow. Or like maybe we need to, put a pillow in between, our legs, or, maybe it's time to get a new mattress. So it's sort of like similar to the running thing too, to some degree, where I'm thinking like, oh, like I didn't feel anything, I didn't change anything up, but maybe it's time to get new sneakers, or maybe it's time to like, maybe I have been doing the same route over and over again and I'm going in the same direction. So maybe it's actually time to like go in a different direction or do a new route because I've gotten so used to sort of like the dips in the pavement or like whatever the situation is. So, yeah.
Love that analogy because yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't just be like, I guess I should never sleep because I wake up all stiff. Or I have plenty of clients who wake up in quite a bit of pain every morning. And yeah, they never say they'll just never sleep.
Yeah.
And I wish that we also took that focus with movement, because movement is really vital to our bodies, but we're so quick to push it off to the side and say, oh, it doesn't work for me because I get hurt. When really, if we could dig into it a little bit more, yeah, it's often shoes, building some strength around that. Shin splints, foot problems are often just needing to build strength in the lower leg. Feeling winded, all these things is just like, well, then you need time. You just need a little bit more time to build up that strength and that awareness. I think even recently in this round, someone had a really nice awareness of like noticing that cardiovascularly they were feeling stronger, and then noticing that their legs were tired. And I was like, that's so brilliant, because that's a great place of awareness of like, oh, one system of my body is getting stronger and developing more stamina, and another system is still developing that strength. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there's that difference, and that can shift over time and based on what you're doing. I've certainly experienced that because in the summer I run with so much elevation, and then when I come back to the city, it's all flat. So then when I go back in the summer, I don't have the cardiovascular strength for the elevation at first, but I've been running the same distances, and it's always like this weird moment of like, oh, this kind of sucks. I'm doing like a 3-mile run, but I'm like, whereas at home, I'm like, oh, that's totally fine. But I think all these awarenesses give people the perspective or the tools, if they can stick with it and continue to build all of these lenses to look through, that allows them to stay consistent and recognize like, oh, I was sick and then I'm coming back to my runs and my muscles are actually still okay, but I'm working through this congestion and I will get beyond this, or whatever the interruption is, because really there's always going to be interruptions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because even just citing the example of someone sort of noticing that there has actually been some changes in even just one system is interesting, and that is like that's just that just makes me so happy, to hear that. And we hear this too when people are talking about just like overall self-awareness, or just even being a little more confident about, being outside and sort of seen in the world. No one's sort of like looking out, not everyone is like looking outside the window and like, but like, there is that, I completely relate to this anxiety being like, oh my gosh, people are like judging me, or like, but like just having just more sort of ownership about like, no, I'm just doing my thing. Like I'm out here just, I think that is just great. Yeah. So another takeaway.
My last question related to this is also specifically about gait. For people who don't know what that word is, gait really just describes like the way you walk or the way you run. Like literally, if I was videoing you, and there are running stores that will have you run on a treadmill and they will video your feet and all these things. And so do your feet roll out or roll in? Do you take a big stride or a short stride? Do you lift your knees? Like all these things. And people, that's another place people really like to obsess or worry. Can you speak a little bit about?
Yeah. So this is it can be a pretty complex question, and I really would encourage um or topic really, because I really would encourage people to it's good to be kind of aware of, but also know that, sort of back to what we were talking about earlier, there's not necessarily like a good or a bad or a right or a wrong way. We all move the way we move. And we're all going to just like move forward. And some of us are going to like shift inwards. Some of us are going to turn outwards. Some of us are going to be, heel strikers. Or other times we're like bounding along and our heels like barely touch. We see that more so in sort of the elite athletes. They have a more efficient way of moving. Less ground to ground contact and less time that they're spending on the ground. But how do you and I and everyone else, like, how does that play into it? I think our footwear choices are important, but there's still, some limitations there. And I would really encourage, if someone is, looking for new running shoes, it is important to just really kind of shop around. Certainly, the folks who are in the running stores, they can provide pretty helpful information. But again, it's, just one person, and you don't know, if they're trying to upsell you something, or they're trying to kind of, they look at you on the scanner and they see that you turn outwards. So therefore you need to like be put in this category of like this kind of shoe. I think it's just really important that you try out different shoes and just really kind of go for like what really feels comfortable. And then just certainly ask for their return policy. Because a lot of times they have a pretty liberal one. So you can, decide sort of what feels good and then test it out and then just like see how that goes. So that's just like one example there. How it plays into sort of everyday movement. Again, there's not like a wrong or a right way. Like we're all going to move the way we're going to move. And it definitely comes up a lot. Like, should I be changing? My doctor said this, or like I read somewhere on the internet that like it's better not to, have my heels strike first. Like I should be on my tippy toes the whole time. So the answer is no, don't change it, because that can, really lead to a lot of other issues. And the example I like to give is like, are you training for the Olympics? And is your goal to be the fastest runner in the world? If it is, then you need to focus on how do you become the most efficient, runner. But since your goals are not that, then you just need to carry on and just focus on you moving, and certainly just developing a little more self-awareness, about that. But don't, beyond that, don't overthink it. So,
I can't agree more. I think this kind of correction minded way of looking at our bodies, for sure, and especially gait, can be really harmful. I would almost say it is really harmful.
yeah.
Because you really can't change how you walk or run unless you are literally kind of supported at that Olympic level with people who are going to like massage your body and do all these things to like help a brand new way of literally locomoting through space. It's like the most basic thing that we do. And those people are making fine-tune adjustments because it can literally shave some seconds off. And those seconds could be the difference between being on the podium or whatever and not. But for your average person, my marker is always just like, are you in pain? And if there's pain and we've already looked through everything else, the shoes, the route, the hydration, the eating, the stretching, the warming up, then it's worth it to investigate. I mean, a lot of people tend to overstride, like in this idea of like, I'm supposed to be faster, I'm supposed to whatever. So they kind of kick their legs out more than they need to, or their posture is really dropped down. So they're almost kind of creating a lot of weight straight down instead of forwards in space. Those are really basic things to look at. But in terms of like getting hyper analytical about like how your foot is striking and, what your ankles are doing, that's how your body moves through space. If you really try and correct it a lot, it's going to have this ricochet effect up the knees, up the hips. You'd be better off just doing a really solid strength routine or something like Pilates that works on all of your stabilizers. Because just from that perspective, as long as there's space and support around any kind of asymmetry, there's not going to be pain. It's when things compress and collapse into each other that we have pain. So you can be really wonky looking and have a lot of support and not have pain. And that's kind of circling all the way back to you running in Central Park and seeing all these different kinds of people racing. I would really encourage anyone out there who's just kind of like run curious to go and watch a big race. Even when I'm up in Ithaca, like the little teeny races are pretty diverse in terms of age and body type. So if you live anywhere, any city that has any kind of race, just go and watch all the way to the end, or start in
The
the middle
end.
and watch
Yeah.
the end. Because
Yeah.
the first part is going to be everyone we already know, a bunch of skinny white men, also younger people. But from like the middle to the back is where you just start to see all kinds of humans also like having a great time. And that's something I like to go cheer the marathon every year, the New York City Marathon. I used to live right on a street that so it was like easy for me to roll out of bed. Now I have to like commute to get there, but it's so inspiring and it just sounds so cliche, but like you just see every kind of person out there and they're like smiling and they're running. They're going so far. I saw people with crutches. I saw people with the blade foot. You see people that have big bodies. You see very old people that have signs saying this is like their, third marathon or whatever, their
Yeah.
53rd finish. Like, people that are, really, I'll just be rude for a second. You see people whose bodies are like busted, like bodies that you're just like, I cannot believe that you are not just walking, but that you're running, not just running, that you're running a marathon. Like, if you think that your gait is weird or your body is like not good for running, go watch a big race and be like, oh my God, if that person is doing it, who is like clearly limping, who has like all kinds of things going on, you can do it. Like, that it's really powerful, and it just really shows how our bodies are strong. Our bodies are able to adapt if we give them space and the correct training. Like, it just sounds like it's such a cliche, but like, you can do anything that you want. Like,
Yeah, I agree. And as much as I know there's a lot of room for improvement in this whole running world that we're in, I have also noticed, even just on social, that for instance, we were just talking about the New York City Marathon, like even New York Roadrunners and even just like the press in general, they were showing, and they've been doing this for, a couple years, but I don't really notice it. Like I didn't really remember like, knowing or seeing this, even like, 5, 7, 10 years ago, that they're showing a lot more of these, you know, all these athletes that are, of all different body types and abilities. And they're really also showing those last finishers that come in, which is so important because they've been out there for, 8, 10, 12 hours.
a really long time.
So, and I think that's really important for everyone to see. I know it makes a good like media story, but I think it's really important just for visibility, just to kind of remind people that like everyone was running the same distance. But this is like the whole spectrum. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think it's the visibility thing is amazing, because I just think you can't help but see someone out there who just looks like you in some way, or dresses like you would, or seems to be approaching it the way that you would, and that matters so much. And even when I've been in races with more people, it matters to be running and see someone who, like, it's like a funny outfit or something, like people that aren't taking themselves very seriously, or someone who's just like chilling and like stopping to walk and have a snack, and you're like, oh right, I'm allowed to just like relax for a minute and just like do whatever I need to do. It is a lot, I almost want to use the word like gentler than I think people think something competitive would be. That is kind of the surprise with running. And I guess it's because it's not a team sport. You're not yelling at people to pass the ball or this or that. You are running your own race, and you're with all these other people. So in a way, you guys are, everyone's on the same team. You're not really trying to beat the people around you. We've talked about just like in very small races, like these trail races and stuff, it is fun to kind of like try to race someone who you're with, but it's usually like, I mean, not usually. It is like everyone kind of knows that that's just fun, because there's none of us are
Yeah.
winning prize money or whatever. It's just kind of fun to leapfrog someone and then have a little dash to the finish. But yeah, I can't say enough that like, if you actually just go out there and see the real people that are out there doing all of this, it really like rips the kind of Nike glossy image away, and I think makes the avenue into running and finding your own running practice a lot easier.
Exactly. Yeah. And then also I really think, anybody who is out there, they're also showing people who may not necessarily like be running or sort of in their running outfit, but they're also kind of showing that like they can do it too. And like that's just also something that, it's just about kind of showing up too, where you don't know who else is maybe kind of, on the sidelines, but curious, like you said, that you're kind of demonstrating that, you can do it too. And yeah, so.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll finish by just plugging us and saying, I think while running as a sport and as a experience in races is actually very inclusive and accessible in terms of just like, you just need yourself to do it. The avenue there is challenging because it is something that, to get better at, ideally you have some kind of structure. It's pretty hard to just completely self-direct. It's pretty hard to become your own run coach if you have no experience in athletics or you've never run before. And so I really appreciate what we do, because sadly there is this disconnect where running as it in and of itself is very open, but the run clubs and kind of the run culture is still really exclusive and elitist feeling. And I felt excluded and shamed by people, which I've definitely written about and even have more to say. So I think our club, I mean, I honestly don't know. I know there's like a club out there for like very slow people, but like even that, we're not even advertising that it's specifically about being slow. We're literally just advertising if you've never done this before or you want to get back into it from a healthier place, which means we have had people that are going on and doing marathons now and people who are quite fast runners. We also have tons of people that like have never owned sneakers before, have never tried to go for a run around the block. And I don't know where else those people would go, to be perfectly honest. Because if you show up to your regular neighborhood run club, there is unfortunately a set expectation that you run a pretty brisk pace and that you basically are already a runner. And even when they're like beginner or whatever, it's just like, it's unfortunately not a lot of people that are very good at teaching a thing or like actually like coaching beginners. So then their idea of a beginner is like still someone who did like high school track.
Yeah. Or just does like 5Ks on the weekend.
Exactly. So I think that what we do is really unique and so important, and I'm so glad to do it with you because I've also certainly gained so much by your coaching.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for being on, and our next enrollment starts in January, and our marathon club starts in May and goes for 6 months into November race season.
Hey, thank you.
That was Busybody Podcast. I'm the founder and owner of Brooklyn Strength Studios. You can find me on Instagram at Brooklyn Strength. You can find out more about my offerings on my website, brooklynstrength.com. I hope you'll subscribe to my Substack, After Class. All's in the show notes. Please rate, review, and subscribe. Please share with your friends so that more people listen to this podcast. I love these conversations, and I hope more people can hear them. My music is by Rob Byrne, performed by the Wild Yaks. My podcast is produced by Brad at Soundtrain Studios, and my illustrations are by Jackie Mendez and Azul Trejo, and edited by myself. Thank you so much.